I want to get to know the people I'm working with, and I write the script specifically for them. Like talking with Colton or even Hank or DC, the other people who worked on the comics.
Hmm.
Like some of the stuff in there is just specifically for them, whether it be like, hey, I have this idea, or like, hey, what do you think about this?
Welcome back to Inspired Inc., the CWS podcast, a show where we promote indie comic creators and become inspired by what they create and their journey of creating it. I'm your host, Brandon Blocksdorf, and today on the show, we have writer Kristain Herrera joining us, and we talk about writing craft and how working through story structure in each issue can greatly elevate your story, why it's great to work with collaborators and how they can bring out the best of your ideas, and how pulling from others can also inspire your ideas as well when creating comics. All of this and so much more on today's Inspired Inc.
I think I've learned that at this point where I talk to certain people because I like your work, but I want to get to know you as a person.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
once I was like, okay, I like you as a person. I just want to be your friend now.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what's
Yeah.
cool. Honestly, like, and I mean, we've collaborated in a sense, you know what I mean?
Hmm. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
doing collaborations with people is like, it's always fun to like really meet them and talk to them. And I always get so excited whenever I meet people that have been in like an Apollo book in person or have interviewed
Yeah.
in person because it's like a weird relationship. It's like you're not just friends, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? You're not just like acquaintances. You're not just like online buddies you've known and like,
Hmm.
sent messages for. It's like, dude, we're in a book together. You know what I mean? Like it's just a different type of excitement that comes out of it.
That's that's something I've learned because like kind of started doing comics like right before the pandemic,
Hmm.
and then the pandemic happened, and then I was like, can't really meet that many people. And then after Apollo came out,
Hmm.
or yeah, that was just awesome. Running into people at Baltimore Comic Con, they're like, "Hey, we worked on the same book together." I was like, "Oh, that's so cool!" And then that small connection, and then we just start talking about that book and more stuff. It just blossoms, and I love that. It's
And
just a
that's why I
cool
think
connection.
like the anthologies are just so much fun for that. Like I
Yeah,
didn't realize the community I was growing when I was making the books. It was very much of me just like scrambling, trying to put a book together, my first book, and like figuring
yeah,
it out and just like hoping everyone's happy and just like getting it down. And then at the end of it all, I just realized that we made a bunch of friends. A
yeah.
lot of people like got to collaborate and come out of projects outside of that. A lot of people got to hear about each other, and a lot of
Hmm.
people like Max Flowers, it was their first time being published. So it was like,
Yeah,
that trips me out because I'm like, how is someone like you like not in 12 books by the time you got to me? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
it just trips me out. But yeah, you were
It's
saying
a
right before COVID you started. I was looking at when the first was the book Sidekick for Hire got
yeah,
put out. It was like 2019, right?
yeah. It was right at the end of 2019. I officially got the prints of it like the day before Halloween on 2019. I was
Oh,
like, oh,
wow.
that was the first time I'm like, oh, this is what it's like to have my own comic, like of my own printed like that. Because I've done like small things here and there, but it wasn't like there wasn't anything that actually made me feel like, oh, I'm a comic book creator. And that was the
Hmm.
first time I did that, and it was awesome. And I sold a few. I sold them at like comic book stores, and I was really proud with what Rick Alves and I did with the cover.
Yeah.
And it was because it pops. It's something that people look at, and you get the whole story idea from it. And if I can make people look at it and just chuckle, because on the front it just says, "We'll save the day for money,"
Hmm.
that people remember that. And so I was really happy with how it all went. And I was like, you know what? 2020 is going to be my year. I was signed up for conventions, and I had my second Kickstarter, or my first Kickstarter, but my second book starting at the beginning of March. I was like, okay,
Oh,
cool. I'm ready. And then the pandemic happened, which is like everyone's story. And I was like, oh, well, I'm already at the bottom. So it's not like I can restart. So it's cool.
yeah, at least you already have like a bump up against a lot of other people, and I mean, it kind of I feel maybe did that help you finish writing your series and put out the rest of the book because 5 issues is pretty or 6 issues. I
It
could
was
be wrong.
five
Five.
issues. I
Okay,
did
yeah,
5 issues, and then I did one shot that was something else separate because I
mm,
just wanted to keep making stories.
nice. Okay, and then there's a prologue in there too. I think I remember seeing?
You're talking about are you talking about my one shot prologue, or are
Oh,
you
that's
talking
what it
about?
is. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I remember because I remember I backed that Kickstarter and I had a cool little bundle of all
Hmm.
5 issues and then that prologue book.
Yeah.
That's so rad though. That's so much work in just like kind of a short amount of time. And when I
Yeah.
think about like what was going on, especially in issue one, I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't read it, but like
Oh,
your
go ahead.
storytelling. Okay, well, we'll talk about it. I'm super happy because you're in a craft perspective, very
Mhm.
well executed, dude. You like introduce this
Thank you.
character and a situation, and then you leave it like where the one guy gets shot, and then it cuts to
Hmm.
the next day, and then
Yeah.
you kind of live through this kid's life and how he's functioning. Very, talked about. I think you talked about Ultimate Spider-Man at the end of that book,
Yeah.
and how that like really like just connected with you. And once I read that after reading, you go through that kid's life and then you find out what actually happened at the end of that moment,
Hmm.
that end of that well, not the first night, but that one night that we pick up on. And
Yeah.
dude, it's such a good cliffhanger, like such a good way of just like cooking us, explaining the
Hmm.
world and the environment, and then drawing us back into some really intense drama. And then just like, whoa, I was so excited to dive into the next issues because damn, dude, that was just very well for a very first issue. And to say it's your
Thank you.
first full comic,
Yeah. I
awesome.
really appreciate it. It was so when I originally, like, I came up with the idea back in college because I was obviously talking with friends about, like, what if people are really superheroes? And it's like, well, it'd be dumb because you die and get hurt. But then, like, the idea of like us being a sidekick because we get hired, so it kind of like grew from that. But like the first draft of the comic, what was so cool about it is it was just going to be, the cliffhanger was the hero dies at the end of the first issue.
Oh,
And
okay.
like the more I like read it, I was like, it, it's so obvious. There's like I want to do a little bit more showing like the main character, but I don't like that being the cliffhanger as much. And so I decided to shorten up that scene significantly,
Hmm.
which thank God I did. Because obviously everyone's first comment, they're like, oh, it's going to be my 50 issue magnum opus.
Yes,
And
exactly.
it's going to be 60 pages for the first issue. I was like, I wanted it to keep it short. I think it's 22 pages full story and 24
Hmm.
pages in total. Because I looked at all the other like Marvel and DC comics and they're all 22 pages.
Hmm.
So I was like, I want to keep it similar like that. I want to prove that I can do that. And as I had other people kind of check it out and read it, I was like, you know what? It needs to be like the fake, like cliffhanger where it's like the hero dies. So like, oh man, that must be the end of the issue. And then there's so much more of the story left.
Yeah.
And then the second one where it turns out Leo killed somebody.
Yeah.
And it's like, that was a big one. I was like, that's the thing that people need to realize, like, oh, this is more realistic kind of thing. And he's
Hmm.
just dealing with that. So it was fun. There's definitely thing going looking back. I think everyone does this where like I would change like a few things in there and update it, but I think that
Always.
comes with the territory of
Yeah.
like once you get better at comics, you're like, well, I could have done this, I could have done that. But overall, I'm really proud of it. Like that's something
Well,
I still show to people.
as a first issue, it's what you need to do to hook someone to connect you to the next part of the series, like,
Yeah.
and that's, a lot of people forget that is that your first issue is really got to convince them as an indie creator. Like, you got to knock it
Hmm.
out of the park so you can start building that fan base. So people are like thirsty and curious on what happens next. Like, I was
Yeah.
thirsty and curious after reading that first issue of being like, man,
Thank
I,
you.
I'm glad I got the 5 issue bundle because I could just die.
Yeah.
It feels like the complete story here. And then going to like your newest book, we call them myths, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so that was such a fun. I mean, your artist that worked with you on that too. Was that
Colton.
Colton? Yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, such a Mike Mingola like vibe and feel to that too. Like,
Yeah.
super fun.
He honestly, he will say this himself. His biggest inspirations are Mike Manola, and then God, I keep drawing Andrew. I forget his last name, but he did Headlopper, and
Oh, I know who you're talking. I know Headlopper. I don't remember his name
yeah,
though. Yeah. Oh, that makes
I,
sense, man.
I
I
have
haven't
his
heard
book
someone
somewhere
name
behind me.
drop Headlopper in a minute. Like, I
Yeah,
have a whole bunch of those issues.
that's his. Those are like his favorite artists. He's like, those are artists that like, okay, I don't have to do the whole normal superhero style. I want to do my style. I want to have more fun with it, and it just worked. That was I love Sidekick for Hire, but since that was like my first comic, it was very much talking with the artists and the colors. I'm like, hey, here's the idea I have. And they're like, cool, sounds good. And I was like, no, kind of give me more feedback. Like, what do you think? Do you think that works? And then we grew that relationship.
Hmm.
With Colton, on the other hand, he and I, we started just pitching ideas at each other, and then we kept bouncing it back. Like originally it was supposed to be a story about a monster hunter. And I was like, I don't
Mm.
want to do them hunting monsters. I feel like that's so overdone. And I don't know. I want to do something cool with the monsters. So like, what if we do a Men in Black style where they're supposed to be helping them for the most part? He's like, ooh, I like that. That's a cool idea. And then it became a buddy cop story. And then he says, like, can one of them be a robot? And it makes sense in the world. I'm like, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's do that. And it just kept going back and forth. And it just became so much fun.
It is fun.
And
And that's the
oh,
cool part behind it. Dude, talk about that like crocodile chase scene. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like one of the coolest pages I've seen in a comic in such a long time. It was such a
The
pleasure
sewer
just to go
scene.
through that. Yes, it's so cool. It's so Scooby Doo like, you know?
Well, that was the thing. I wrote I wanted to start in the sewer part of the story, which was really cool. And then Colt was like, hey, I have this idea for a page. I don't know if we can make it fit. And he just sent me the roughest draft of it. And I was like, yeah, we can make it fit. Absolutely. Let's find a spot for it. And it worked seamlessly for it. And it was just
Oh
something that
yeah.
was so important that we had to put this. Everything that we do has a purpose in this comic. And it's fun. That's the thing. We just want to have fun with it.
And it shows too, because like right when I got to open up the file and check it out, and it was just
Mhm.
like, all right, I'm always interested in seeing what people are dishing out and what they can offer and whatnot. And it's like, man, these books don't feel like an indie like right out of the gate person starting
Mhm.
them because like the world building you constructed and what we call it, sidekick for hire, and then what you're
Yeah.
doing with like we call them myths, like those seem like very like already published like with Boom or like IDW type of formatted and craftsmanship behind it from the art to the storytelling like and like
Thank
so
you.
Neil Gaiman of you to go like in that myth direction but take your own
Mhm.
twist behind it. Were any of those
Yeah.
monsters like real creatures that you've actually inputted or were they your creations that you're making?
So in the comic, there's little files
Hmm.
of like each major character and each creature. I did a
Hmm.
lot of research. So every monster or cryptid that you see, the first location of its sighting and the year that it was first sighted are all true for the most part. Like this is just based off research and everything. I say true
Yeah.
because there's no like actual proof behind it, which is something that I love. But yeah, I did so much research in it. Like there's more that's going to be showing up later, but that was really important where I was like, I want to have some semblance of facts in there, but I didn't want to be like hampered on those where like, oh, it's got to keep true to like these creatures. And the cool part about cryptids is there's so little information about them, so I could just pretty much do what I want for the
Yeah.
most part.
Yeah, it's a fun little twist. I mean, there's a publishing company called Paranoid American. We got to interview him here on the show too.
Oh, cool.
And they dive into a lot of those like, cryptids and stuff like that and a lot of conspiracy theory stuff too.
Yeah.
And they do their own twist and it's a lot of fun and it really drew me back to those, previews that I was seeing from that publisher.
Hmm.
And that's the cool part is that you can take this wild thing, which true or not, yet to be
Yeah.
told. I wouldn't be surprised at a certain extent if a lot of them were
Yeah.
real, but like it's so much fun just to get more creative with them. You're just like feeling your creativity and being able to do a
Hmm.
twist and like, it feels very Hellboyish. And
Yeah.
it's not even like you're copying Hellboy or this is a Hellboy mimic. It's, taking monsters and doing a spin on them. And it's so hard to pull that type of stuff off, I feel.
Yeah. I don't mind the comparison at all. Like if people are like, "Oh, it's very Hellboy," like I'm like, "Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely."
great.
Like Hellboy was sick. I loved reading it, and so I read a little bit of Hellboy when I was younger, but I never fully finished it, and I didn't finish it until like last year.
Oh, cool. I haven't finished Hellboy
And
before. I've only read the first volume or two. I think I have that
yeah,
omnibus, that first like
yeah.
big book. Yeah.
So it's a great run,
Hmm.
but it was after I finished it, didn't love the ending of it. I didn't hate it.
Hmm.
But the reason why I say that is because looking back on it, I enjoyed the journey more than I enjoyed the destination.
There you go.
And that was like for something that's been going for so long, for so many issues, the fact that oh, I'm really interested. I want to, oh, like I look back on it so fondly. And that was like, that's what I kind of want to do. Like, first issue, get people hooked is great. You want a strong ending as well, but I want to make sure there isn't a boring part in the middle. I want people to look
Mhm.
back as like, I really enjoyed the issues in between for that.
Oh yeah, and I think I could see how you formulate that too in your stories because
Hmm.
you always come out with a bang, and then you have some exposition world building in the middle, and then you're
Hmm.
really good at circling it back, and that's what like we call them myths does. Like, we start off
Hmm.
following the alligator creature. We kind of get
Yep.
this really fun, like we're in for it. You're selling us on the book and what we're getting a taste for, and
Yeah.
then you start introducing the world and what they're a part of and like who they're associated with, and that Men in Black and that Amanda Waller
Yeah.
character and everything. And then you're just like, oh, okay, so it's the first issue, and we're going on our second adventure, and we're
Yeah.
getting details, and we're seeing how this is connecting to the first monster in a sense. And then you leave us with a great, once again, uh, just like a great. Why am I spacing out the coolest thing that
Cliffhanger.
comics cliffhanger? Yeah, there you go. Think
Yeah.
it's a
No,
morning, I guess. I need
I
my
was,
coffee. But that cliffhanger is just. I mean, that's what's cool is that you leave us dropped, and then you're like, where are we going from this? How can I just stop here? And that's what
yeah.
you want to do with comics, no matter where it builds up to. How can I just stop reading at this point? And that's the
Mhm.
best way to chop someone's head off and get them to come back for the second issue.
Yeah. This after like a few years of writing other stories and doing other short comics and things like that. This series, what I wanted to do, and I was talking with Colton about it, it was just, I want to split it up into different acts where like people feel like they get their money's worth, but it doesn't feel like overcrowded too
Hmm.
much. But also like, hey, this is a chunk of the first part of the story, and this is the second chunk, and then it leads off to the third chunk. And like, I just want to do different acts in each issue that
It's the
just
best
flow
way.
really well. Yeah.
It's
Instead of
it
it being
shows.
like, yeah. And I didn't want to do like each issue being an act. I want different acts throughout the issues that just kind of flow through it. So, but
Man,
yeah, that
and
was,
that's pure craft, dude. Like, and that's really
yeah,
cool that you're analyzing stuff and you're able to write in that way and to really like pull it off because it's really easy to get bogged down in the middle or at the end of a story and
yeah.
just not land it.
It's it's a learning process. I had a breakfast with somebody while I was in Chicago, and we were kind of talking about story structure and different things like that. And they said, why didn't you do this or why didn't you do that? I'm like, it's because of stuff that I didn't really know. A lot of things that I'm doing in this comic, I'm learning as I go. Like, I
Mm.
know I'm not at the level I can be, and I want to be even better. I want to just keep getting better and better with that while also having fun. Like, that's the two important things, that I always improve, and then that me and the people I work with are having fun. Those are the two most important things whenever I make comics. Because if I'm having fun, I feel like other people are going to enjoy it and have fun as well.
Yep. Yeah. Honestly, yeah. If you feel like there's a dull part in your script, that probably means that there's a dull part in your script,
Yes,
like,
exactly.
and it's always good to like cut something out and reveal it
Mhm.
later, or just finding a better way to present or play something. Like, if you don't feel like it fits and you feel like you're really just forcing that peg into that square,
Yeah.
I really recommend just taking that peg out of that square and figuring it out.
I,
It's a puzzle. Comics are giant puzzle
yeah.
pieces you got to figure out and mess with and mold with. Like, it's not so much.
That's 100%.
Yeah, like writing isn't so much a physical thing where you're messing with like clay and like how an artist is with their pen and pencil and like erasing and
Hmm.
stuff like that. But it is very much like, okay, I have these pieces. How am I going to manipulate them? And how am I going to be very clear and concise at the same time? Because that's another thing you're really good at doing. And I think that's what some people forget when they're making comics is that everything's up here in your head. And you
Yeah.
have to not only convey this clear message and story to your artist, but know that that's also being conveyed to your audience because you have probably much more personal conversations with your artists about pages, about scenes,
Yeah.
where stuff is going, what you're predicting and thinking and feeling, but making sure the audience gets that too. So vital.
Yeah. That's like writing my scripts. Like, I feel weird showing other people my scripts, not like, oh, I'm super embarrassed or anything like that. But I want to get to know the people I'm working with, and I write the script specifically for them. Like talking with Colton or even Hank. or DC, the other people who worked on the comics,
Hmm.
like some of the stuff in there is just specifically for them, whether it be like, hey, I have this idea, or like, hey, what do you think about this? Like, I have like the panel layout, and then sometimes it's just like a dumb joke in there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
some of them land, some don't. Like, I remember Colton at one point was like, "Oh, this is pretty funny." I was like, "Ah, thanks, man." He's like, "Do you need that?" I was like, "No, it's just for you." I was like, "If you want to do that, that's cool." And then there'd be other times where this is the growing working relationship where he's like, you're doing too much in this scene." I was like, "Yep, totally makes sense. This is stuff that I need to know what you like, if you want more detail or less detail." And that's what I look forward to when I work with people, just that honest back and forth with that. Um, it just it's great. I keep bragging about everyone else I work with just because it 100% feels like, hey, I have this idea. Can I do this? I'm like, yeah, and that includes changing up like even the lettering for how Roscoe the robot talks.
Hmm.
Like
Oh
that
yeah.
was DC's idea. I
Brilliant.
was like, yeah, I wanted to show something like all that. He was like, yeah, we could do that. The way some of the letters of like the locations are at, that
Hmm.
was his idea. The coloring
That's
that
great.
Hank does is fantastic.
Phenomenal.
Making the alligators purple was his idea 100%. When he did it, I remember like Colton was like, I don't know about this. I was like, I need to sleep on it for one day. And then like the next day he's like, this is genius. This is amazing. Because like
That's
it's
always the
so
best.
out there. Yeah, it's so
Like
out there. You're just not used to it. And it was just the
disagreeing with something and knowing it's like, oh, I just gotta wait. Like it doesn't feel
Mhm.
right. And then the next day and be like, no, this is brilliant. Actually, I just
Yeah.
didn't get it right away. My brain just needed a second to process it and realize how cool this was, you know? And that's always a
Well,
cool thing to draw back to.
that's the thing. Like how there's no purple alligators in the world. Like they're all green.
Mhm.
And Hank was like, just let me know if this works or doesn't. I was like, I kind of like it. It fits the story, the aesthetic, the feeling of everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And but it's just so we're just not used to it. And
Well,
that's when you're doing
you
something new, it's very hard for people to wrap their head around.
you start off like really well with explaining the rules of the universe and like in
Mhm.
both of your books, very well done. Like
Yeah.
you're explaining like this is going to be insane, like this
Mhm.
isn't our real world, like we have a robot with us right away,
Yeah.
like and just dropping in these things like so early on and letting us know the rules of it lets us
Yeah.
know that any of these things are possible,
Mhm.
and that way we're not too thrown off or shocked and stuff like that. And there's this, there's this Steven Spielberg thing he did. It was like a TV show, and there was like this episode where it has all these like these guys in the Air Force, and they're going and they're flying and they're in battle and all this. And one of them's like a cartoonist and everything, and they're getting shot down and they're letting everyone go, and the guy is just like staying in the ship, and he's hoping he can save everyone. And then he starts drawing, but then he starts drawing and he starts drawing like wheels on this plane, and all of a sudden like these like wheels come out of this plane and he saves everyone. You don't believe it at all because
Yeah.
the entire episode, you're just like, this is a real world situation. There's
Yeah.
nothing false about it. And then you dip that in and you're just totally thrown off and out. And you're like, how does this connector
Mhm.
make you're just a cop out, copping out like that is
Yeah.
just the worst. But you do it right, like you did it, and you show us the rules immediately on page
Mhm.
1 through 3. We're sold. We get it.
Yeah.
None of that shocks or surprises us as in like a disappointing or confusing way. It shocks and surprises us as like a fun, pleasurable way.
Yeah. You have to establish the rules early on. And I think a few people I've talked to when I like read over their comics, I'm like, that was an important thing for me. Like you establish the rules without actually like stating it. Like
Yeah.
sidekick for hire, I'm like, there's superheroes in this world,
Yeah.
but nobody has superpowers. It's all just pretty much money is the superpower in that world.
Yeah.
And I was like, I had to stick with that. And then later on, there's a villain who shoots electricity out. I'm like, okay, they can't have superpowers. I already established that. So how does this happen? I'm like, oh, they built a machine because they're philanthropists and they have money, and it's just all that. And it's like, okay, that makes sense for it.
Hmm.
For this one, we already established like, hey, there are weird things going on. Like
Yeah.
there's a secret organization, there are these cryptid monsters, and then there's robots. It's like, okay, So this is going to be a weird thing, but it makes sense in the world. And like everyone kind of just accepts it. We don't really say
Yeah.
like there are people in the comics like later on where like everyone's seeing after all the carnage where even just like a background character is like, is that a robot? I'm 1,000% sure that's a robot. And then they were like, no, no, it's a guy in a costume. It's all good. Like Star Wars. It's like, okay, cool.
Yeah. Dude,
Like
that's
that's
so
how they explain it.
That's so cool. Like, I'm glad you keep so much of this in mind, like, whenever you're creating your scripts. And, like, so where did this start from for you? Like, wanting to be a writer and such a detailed writer at that. This is craft for you. This, everything you're putting in your books, pure, just like, I love it. And, like, because it's a book, I can sit down and
Thank
just analyze and, like, have fun.
Yeah.
I would love to do a director's cut overview on some of these issues one day to see how you're breaking stuff up with the script. Cause I find so much pleasure in like analyzing just the craft of comics and the craft of writing. Where did this begin for you that you knew that you wanted to pursue this and so intensely too?
So I kind of explained a little bit like how I got into comics in like the end of my first issue of Psychic for Hire because I was
Hmm.
like, this is why I love it. I went to the library, started collecting comics. But when I was in high school, I was like I was in that weird phase in school where people were bullying me for being a nerd, and
Oh
then
yeah,
about halfway through high school,
yeah. They were
they
probably
were
around the
like,
same age then.
yeah, but then like halfway through high school, people were like, "Oh, superheroes are cool. Did you see the
Yeah.
new Captain America movie?" I was like, "Yeah." They're like, "Oh, you read comics? Tell me about it." I was like, "It was weird. It was just a weird time for that." So I lived both worlds. But I remember buying comics from my comic book store, bringing them to school, and then people were like, "Oh, that's really cool. What is that? Is that The Walking Dead? Can I borrow it?" And I just started giving out comics to other people. So like there's a lot of comics behind me. It's very
Yeah.
obvious that all these books I've read. Some of
Nice.
them I've read twice at this point. But at a certain point, like I'm like, well, if they're just collecting dust and I'm not planning on rereading them, I just give them out to other people.
That's cool.
It's like I just want other people to read comics. Usually, if they're kid friendly, I give them to my nieces and nephews and other kids around. But because of during high school, I was like, you know what? I want to own my own comic book store. That's what I want to do, and just like sell comics and get people more into it. I think it'd be awesome. And I interviewed people during college whenever I went to business school. I have a
Uh-huh.
business management degree and I decided
Oh,
to write comics. It's one of the
and
funniest
of
things
course,
ever.
yeah.
Um, but every comic book store owner that I talked to all said the same thing. They said, don't do it. And I felt so disheartened and very unwelcome from that. It was a bummer.
Yeah.
So, but I was like, I'm still a fan of comics. And then went
Well,
to my
why would
first.
they say no? Like, what drove you? What drove have them drive you away from pursuing that?
So a, it's a business. So businesses are very it's a bunch of stress. Some people really love it. Granted, it was just like a few stores that in certain areas that it was just grumpy people.
Yeah.
And I don't know what their story is. I don't know what the history is, so I don't want to judge too much, but it like, as like a 18, 19-year-old trying to figure this out, it's very disheartening to be like, no, you don't want this. It's stressful. It's awful. It's like, there's not till later when I started traveling more and I visit other comic book stores where people are like, no, this is awesome. Like there's one near me called Syndicate that I love going to, Infinite Realities. There's one in Savannah called Neighborhood Comics, which is just full of good people who just want to support the community and have fun and get people loving the art and literature of comics. And it's so inspiring. And if I met those people when I first started, my pathway might have been different.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. But since I met the other people, it kind of pushed me away from it. I was like, I don't know what else I'm going to do. I don't know. And I thought about it more. It's like, I have this idea about the sidekick, let me just try writing a comic. Like I never really liked writing in high school or college during the time because I was always writing what they wanted me to write.
Yeah.
But I loved doing the storytelling. Did Dungeons and Dragons. I was always the DM and it's so much fun. I was like, you know what, let me just try this out. And after I finally got my script done and found an artist, well, I should back up a little bit. When I wrote the script, I did what every creator I think does when they first start, was like, okay, I wrote the story. When do I talk to Marvel and DC? When do I talk to Image? And that's
Yeah.
not how that works. I found that out real quick. And I remember I went to a panel with a bunch of creators. It was like Kyle Starks, Amy Chu, and Donnie Cates at
God,
one of
nice.
my local conventions in Atlanta. And somebody else asked, I was like, how do you break into comics? The old question that everyone gets, how do you break into comics? And all three of them said, you need to make a comic. And it's
Mm-hmm.
just, I don't know why it was at that point. I've heard it before, but it wasn't until like that point where I was like, oh, I get it. I need to work with somebody.
Yep.
And so that's when it started. And I started working with somebody. And then when I finally made my first issue with the artist Rick and the colorist at the time, Veronica, and Tobin, the letterer, and it helped me design the book, I was like, okay, I think I understand this. And I made the book and I was like, this is what it feels like. And I became so addicted to it. I was like, I got to make more. This is so cool. And I want to share with people. I want to see what people's thoughts are, good or bad. I want to see what people like. I want to do something different. I started doing the same superhero stuff as everyone else, but now I'm like, you know what? I want to try different things. That's why I did the one-page comic for the Apollo and Out Comes the Comics.
Yeah.
That one-page one was just like, I want to try a one-page comic. I did a 22-page, 24-page comic. I want to try to see if I can do a whole story in a single page.
And it's hard. It's really hard doing a one pager, dude. I'm not gonna lie. And that's a big reason we chose, like, some of these 1-page stories. And that was like, again, back to craft. Like, you're able to tell like a really good story in 1 page. And the people who did the shortest stories are the ones that I know worked the hardest, because it's so hard to get down and execute, so kudos to you on that for sure.
Hey, that was, oh my God, it was definitely the whole team on that one. This is something I always joke around, tell people that anytime I work with an artist, they make me look smarter than I actually am.
Oh, 100%.
And I really appreciate it.
100%. I'm the same way. China, Tanner, Evan, Kristian, everyone I've worked with, Jeremy, all of them make everything I do just look so much better than I think it is. 100%. Yeah.
It's great. It's awesome. But yeah, that was, once I did that, then I did my one-shot prologue, which was completely different from Psychic for Hire. It was sad. And I was a little worried about it because I was like, I'm going to put it on my website for free to read. And after a few people read it, they were like, I will buy a physical copy of this. It's that good. I was like, all right, well, I guess I'll print out a few hundred and that'll be it. That's all I'm going to make for those. But now I'm doing this one and I did a lot more design work on it for Myths. Like, DC did a lot of the lettering and kind of helped out with the logos, but I wanted to figure out the back matter. I did the back part of the page. I had Colton help me out with some of the art. I did the credits page. Like, that was something I'm like, I want to learn how to do more stuff.
Yeah.
From this comic. For the variant covers, I was in charge of putting the logos in the right spot.
Oh, cool. So you're doing a lot of design work to help out, like carrying a load of a book. And that's such a good talent I'm actually trying to do that more. Especially with CWS. Yeah. I'm like designing all of our anthologies we're putting out, and I'm trying to like do that because Max Flowers does it all for me for Apollo, and Max is astonishing. So I just let Max do everything he possibly can. Yeah. I love Max. But yeah, it's difficult, man, learning programs and figuring stuff out. And I'm not like super computer literate. I'm not gonna lie. Like, it takes me a minute to catch on. I feel very old manish at a certain point where I'm just like, man, these programs are just like too much. And but once you get a knack and a vibe and a feel, you're just like, oh, like skill set unlocked. Like, it's just like anything else when it comes to comics. You got to put in time and the hours and dabble and make mistakes and figure it out.
That's like this morning and yesterday, I've just been packing and shipping comics out. So I have to pack up about 36 more boxes today and then ship them out with like a total of like 70 boxes today.
Oh, wow. Is it all for your Kickstarter that just wrapped up for you? Yeah.
Yeah. So I
Which
finally
one was
have
that
all
one that you kicked? Was it, we call them Myths?
We call them Myths. Yeah. Okay. So, but I finally got the book. I got the books in right before my honeymoon. So I was like, well, and I messaged everyone like, I'm so sorry. It's going to be another few weeks. I'm going on my honeymoon. I wish I could do it, but I'm also not going to it's not a good way to start my marriage by being like, hey, I'm going to work during our honeymoon.
Yeah, I figured
And
that.
everyone's like, oh, yeah, totally fine. Enjoy your honeymoon. Well, we can wait. We trust you. Um, but yeah, it's just, I figured out the whole packaging thing. I figured out I finally got one of those label printers,
Oh,
like
sick. I got to get one of those
thermal.
too. Yeah.
Oh my God, it is a game changer. But
Lifesaver, I
two
bet. Yeah.
days, yeah, 2 days ago, I was struggling with it because it was a new machine. I've never messed with one of those before. And I was just trying to figure out the pacing with it. And I was using ShipStation. I was trying to
Hmm.
use a free thing so I can cut down on costs. And it's just me learning all these systems and laying on the floor and getting frustrated. And then as of yesterday noon, I was like, okay, I finally figured this out. It's so much easier. And so now
Yeah.
I'm just packing them all up. But it's always like I want to learn this. I'm having the worst time of my life. I got it now.
Yeah. Yes, dude, that's exactly what it is. It's always
Every
that
time.
like excitement. You're like, oh, I'm gonna get this, and then by tomorrow, I'm gonna be pumping stuff out. And then it's just
Mhm.
a week of like pulling your hair out and saying you hate it, and you're like, this is dumb. I should have hired
Yeah.
someone else. How do I afford someone to do this for me? And then you eventually get it, and you're like, it wasn't that bad. I'll
That
do it again.
satisfaction
Like,
is about that's the way I feel about how I felt about my writing for a while when I couldn't figure out like how to write scripts because I never
hmm
had any formal training with any of that. I was just
hmm
reading other people's work. That's how I feel about the design work that I did on We Call the Myths. I'm just trying to figure that out, talking with other people who worked on the book on other books, and
hmm
then shipping and so on, and conventions and everything else I need to do that I feel like I need to be more successful at. It's just learning from other people, getting frustrated when it doesn't work out, and then figuring out why it didn't work out and
yeah.
pivoting.
Yeah. And that's what you got to do. That's what you got to do to
Mhm.
be successful for sure, is just to go out there and ask your community questions and like, and
Yeah.
people are so great and so nice and honest. And,
Oh
some
yeah.
people will be like, let's meet up for 30 minutes and I'll give you a quick rundown and an idea, or, I'll help you solve this one issue you're stuck on. And, stuff like that. People will just save you on it. Max was teaching
Yeah.
me how to format my zines. I wish I had one near me to show off. But like he was, I use a app on an iPad called Publisher
Yeah.
2, and that's helped me just place everything. It's like $20. It's like a lifetime thing. It's really cool. And so
Yeah.
I just do it all on my iPad and I like format it, and it's actually working really well and making it really quick for me. So I'm really enjoying this aspect because I did the punk anthology on Adobe, which was like
Yeah.
a crazy wild mess I had to figure out because sometimes like just making a PDF seems impossible. Like,
Yeah, I'm trying to learn Adobe as much as possible, like
mhm.
Photoshop, Illustrator, everything on there.
I'm
Like,
not gonna lie, dude. Like, if you look into, so what I'm learning with my new position is that we're designing even anthologies like layouts, so I could see it and see how it feels, and I could just
mhm,
export things super quick. Is a program called Adobe XD, and it's
Adobe
made to like,
XD.
yeah, it's made to like design like for web for sure.
Yeah,
But dude, I export everything as PNGs, JPEGs, PDFs, and it's so fast and it's so awesome. It's a cool designer's tool, especially because like I'm a designer that doesn't design from scratch. I could get
mhm,
something and like manipulate it and figure it
yeah,
out at that point. All the all the CWS like promos for the show we're doing,
yeah,
and that's all through Adobe XD. All these like everything you see is all done
yeah.
via XD. So that might be a cool program for you to
That's
dive
cool.
into and like mess with too. Yeah.
See, that's interesting to me. That even just like talking with other people, seeing what they work, seeing if like maybe that's something I can use. If
Yeah.
not, I know what it's there and I can possibly suggest it to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
that's the other thing I love about this community. So, earlier I was talking about how like the comic book stores were just like, you don't really want to do this. It was not as welcoming.
Yeah.
As soon as I made a comic and talked to other people in the comic book community, like even before I made a comic, they were so friendly. They were like, "Hey, this is what you need to do. This is what
Mm-hmm.
happens." Like they were actually giving me advice. The only time people get annoyed and frustrated is when they give you advice and then you continually don't do it and say, "I don't understand what's going on."
Honestly, yeah.
Like I
Yeah.
100% get it, but it's like everyone's been so helpful and welcoming. That was the other thing I saw at C2E2. A lot of people that I knew before at other conventions, and there's one person. Their name is Fend, FEND,
Uh-huh.
and I was talking to them because they have an awesome convention setup. Like it's very noticeable. They kind of have like a little drape. They have a candy
Cool.
machine.
Oh, rad.
Um, they're a big fan of Waffle House. And so what they did is all their inventory, they give a menu out to people with all their inventory, but it looks like a Waffle House menu.
That's sick.
And I'm like,
That's super
that's
cool.
genius, right? That is something unique. That is cool. And I was talking to them for about 15 minutes. I was just like, I want to make my table stand out at other shows because as a writer, I'm not going to make as much money as somebody who's doing commissions or
Mhm.
selling prints and stuff like that. I want to sell books,
Yeah.
but I want it to be a welcoming spot. I can't just like have my books laying flat on there. So I kind of raise them up. I'm trying to figure things out. And they gave me so many good tips. They're like, hey, what if you did that? We bounce just ideas back and forth with each other. And it was so cool. And they even says like, I'm a graphic design artist who's making comics. I was like, that's so, I
So
love that.
awesome. Yeah. It's the
It's
coolest thing to
amazing.
hear.
Yeah. And it's just fun picking people's brains, seeing like, okay, what's working for you? What doesn't work for you? What would work for me? What wouldn't work for me? Things like that. Like
I
I
mean,
can't do
picking up
a
one new
background.
thing is awesome. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like picking up one thing from everyone is just like, oh, now
Yeah.
I'm like an arsenal full of goodness, you know? And it's not
Hmm.
copying or ripping from them. It's just like, man, that was cool. That could work in me. I'm
Yeah.
gonna just like when you're influenced by an artist or writer that you admire, it's like you're just picking little nitpick stuff and nobody's gonna
Yeah.
notice what you're nitpicking except for yourself.
Exactly. There's people who like read We Call Them Myths already, and they were like, I really like what you did with the letter. Like there are maybe two curse words in the comic, but they're
Yeah.
scratched out.
Yeah. I
And
noticed that. Yeah.
that was on purpose. And I stole that idea from a book called Metal Shark Bro. And I actually got to talk to the letterer at C2E2. He's like, I
Oh,
really like that.
rad.
It actually makes me think about my idea here. I'm gonna be honest. I saw that a long time ago, wanted to do something similar. So I stole that idea from you.
Thank you.
Did you really? That's awesome. That's so great. It worked out so well.
It's kind of a compliment, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The people who don't like think that like, oh, you're stealing my ideas and you're copying my
Yeah.
style and you're mimicking me. Like, nah. It's like take it as a compliment because if
Yeah.
someone's pulling from you, that means you've done something so cool that
Hmm.
you've been inspiring someone else to try that as well. And that's what we
Yeah.
want. You know what I mean? Like you want to inspire, you want to give other people ideas so that they can try to pull it off themselves.
Exactly.
And again, you're doing your own twist on it. And even I think it's even slanted and everything. Like on the
Yeah.
page, it looks like it stands out really well, but it doesn't
Mhm.
like distract you from anything. You know, it's
Yeah.
it's it's well placed in that manner.
I think that was the other thing. Like I saw theirs and it's very much like just a block. Like they
Hmm.
were marked out like it was taped over. I
Yeah,
was like, that's cool. I want to do a scratch off thing. Like somebody's like looking over documents and just
yeah,
and
exactly.
that was the idea from it. So it wasn't like fully blatantly like ripping someone off, but it was definitely like I'm taking inspiration from you.
Hmm.
This is something that I want to do that actually makes sense with the story. And he thought it was awesome. He didn't think I was like, oh, you're just ripping me off. You're just doing what I'm doing because it's different enough.
Yeah,
Like it was just something like, oh, I took inspiration from you. It's like, oh, thank you. That's so awesome.
yeah, I love
So I
that.
love it. This community is so full of so many great people, so many awesome people who love sharing ideas. And it's the people who are like, I'm gonna keep this idea close to me that I'm like, I don't really want to work with you.
Yeah. Yeah,
Like,
it's sharing it. I mean, how is someone supposed to grow in art if someone else hasn't shared how they do their art to get them to
yeah,
understand? Because you never know. I mean, it's like what you were saying about like going and making your first comic. How many times have we heard just go make a comic? Or how many times have
yeah,
you heard you got to write every day or you got to
yeah,
draw every day or you got to start with cylinders and squares and cubes and then go for it? Sometimes you can hear that all the time, but then it
yeah,
takes the one person to say that same exact thing and all of a sudden you're just like, "Oh, that just makes sense."
yeah.
Like
I don't know
how
what I don't know what clicked in my brain, but it's always that. Every time I tell people that, I'm like, you just got to make a comic. It's always usually the same reaction. You're like, yeah, well, it's like I understand. It's way easier said than done. I think that's
Mhm.
exactly what they said. I was like, it's 100% easier said than done.
Yeah.
That's why not everyone can do it. Everybody
Mhm.
wants to do it, but not everyone can do it. And once you know how to make a comic, it's easier. It's not easy, but it is
Yeah.
easier because you know
Yeah.
what you can do, you know what you did wrong, things like that. And I was just like, that makes sense. That it just finally clicked in my head for that. And I was like, I'm done waiting around for it. And I just
And
want to do my stuff.
you're totally right, because every time I write a story or I start working on an issue or start doing an anthology, it's still super hard. It
Yeah.
is
Oh,
so
absolutely.
hard. It is like the most daunting thing. Or even starting a drawing. We just did our second episode at the time of recording this. We just did the second episode of Spilled Ink, and
Yeah.
just approaching the drawing, I was just like terrified last night because I wasn't sure what to do or how to start. But like I've
Mhm.
done it before. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's always I know how to do it and finish it and get it done with, but it's always super hard. But
Yeah.
it gets easier every time. For some
Yeah.
reason, it's as difficult as these things are, it does get more simple because like from doing the punk anthology and then helping with
Mhm.
Cybersync and Shadow and like I'm helping with Jade Lauder's like horror show anthology and stuff like that. Like, it's the thing about like teaching. You just keep on saying it out loud and repeating the process. You
Mhm.
start to like really get it engraved and it just comes out easier and it feels accomplishable after a while.
That's the thing. I think you said it perfectly. Once you finally do it, you're like, oh, it is possible. I
Hmm.
know I have to go through so much work to get there, but once you actually see you can do it, it's a lot more doable.
Hmm.
Because that's the other thing. I think a lot of people are like, well, I don't know if I'm actually able to do that. I'm like, there's only one way to find out. And it's okay to step away from something and then try it a different way. I think that's the
Yeah.
other thing people forget. They just want to keep doing this one thing.
Yeah.
Like whether it's just the same comics or like, this is the comic, this is what's going to help me out. It's like, if you want to, that's cool. But if you see it's not working, like comics are a business, unfortunately.
Hmm.
Like there's an artistic part of it. But when businesses aren't working, you pivot and do something else.
Yep. Yep.
Like when a comic's not working, you try out something else.
Hmm.
There's it's a reality that I think a lot of people need to kind of wrap their head around to a certain degree.
Yeah.
So,
And even
and
when
it's
breaking into comics, like it's
mhm,
not the same for everybody. The first issue
exactly.
isn't produced the same by dude. And Punk Anthology was my first comic.
Yeah,
And
and I had no idea though, but it seemed so cool.
thank you.
Like it was such
And
a really well thing done. I love the poster, like the promotion behind everything. It was just awesome all the way around.
thank you. I super appreciate that. Thank you so much. And it just felt
Yeah.
like the scariest, hardest thing in the universe,
Hmm.
But it's like I had tried for years before that to make a comic. Like,
Yeah.
Teenage Babylon. Actually, I have the ash can right up here. It's the first like 12 pages of like it's a zero issue to kind of lead you into the series.
Yeah.
And it's just like, man, I have artwork from someone who's tried to do this book before. I'm have another story called the Broadcast Dialogues I've been working on for like 5 years. It just never
Yeah.
came to fruition, and I have sketches and concept art from other artists before, but it wasn't until I met Kristian or I met Jeremy that all this stuff was like, oh, it's
Yeah.
possible. It can work. Like it takes a really long time to figure it out and to figure
It
out
does.
what's good or bad. And sometimes you just need to grow and meet people and you just haven't met the right person yet to make some of these
Yeah.
things come true.
I think everyone has stories that they're like, I want to make. I can't make it yet.
Hmm.
Like there's one I've been working on for like I definitely have a notebook full of other ideas that are like, I would like to work on that. But it's just been on the back burner because I haven't found the right opportunity. I didn't really find the right people that I wanted to work with on those. But like one of them that I was working on since like I think like a year and a half ago, like I came up with the title before I came up with the story, and it's just Heather Hates Hell.
Oh, that's cool.
And it was right. Like
Yeah,
the
that's super
title was
cool.
like, oh, that's
Yeah.
awesome. But I've been sitting on that. I wrote out outlines. I didn't really like it. I kept writing it. And now it's just like, for right now, it's on the back burner. It's not something I'm giving up on. It's just, I can't do anything with it right now.
Hmm. Yeah,
So I have
that's a
to
good
figure out
thing to
something
know
else.
too.
Yeah.
It's just like this has just got to sit. I gotta let. I'm
Hmm.
not ready for this. Like I'm either not ready to write this. I don't have the
Yeah.
story, inspiration that's hit me to make it click yet, or I just haven't
Hmm.
met the right artist to help inspire me to do it.
Yeah.
Broadcast dialogues is the same way. Like I knew for one, I wasn't a smart enough writer when I first had the idea, and I was
Yeah.
like, I love this. I'm gonna try to pull it off one day. I'm just not there yet. And then
Yeah.
I just never came across an artist that I felt was like at a caliber enough for what I was envisioning for this book. And
Yeah.
it took me literally years until I came across Jeremy, who, offered to want to like work together and partner on something. And I was
Mhm.
like, you know what? I kind of have this random thing, give it a shot. And then it was just like, man, this is now it's opening up gateways and doors. And, his contribution has
Yeah.
like elevated it to a different degree. And now I'm like, I have 1,000 ideas, but like, man, and it sucks because I'm at a point with these other books where I'm like, I can't dive into that yet. Like, it's going to
Yeah.
distract me. I'm going to be pulled into it. I got to wrap up all this stuff. So now it's inspired me to wrap up projects to get to that project.
Yeah. It's like you said, comics take a lot of time and a lot longer than people think. Like
Hmm.
we call them this. We did the Kickstarter like through February. Like I think it was
Hmm.
like in halfway through January through February. We got the books out now and we could ship it out. It's going to be shipped out by this month to everyone.
Nice.
But we've been sitting on these comics, this comic idea since like almost 2 years ago. Like this was like just us talking about it and then kind of working on some concept art. And then I worked on the script and then he worked on the art. We took a while to find a colorist and then we found a letterer. And it just, in a perfect world, because it was like monsters and cryptids, were like, let's do it at Halloween. It's like,
Yeah.
but it just, the timeline didn't work out.
Hmm.
So like people look at it and think like, oh, you just made this comic since January and now it's coming out in May. That was really fast. It's like, no, we've been sitting on this for a little while.
Dude, yeah, oh man, it comes down to that with everything too.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been promoting Teenage Babylon for 2 years before I even had an artist for it. I've been saying it's a
Yeah.
cosmic punk rock love story so that people like know about it. So I've been marketing this book before it was even a book. But
Yeah.
now that it's becoming a book, it's like, well, y'all know it. Y'all like know
Yeah.
Teenage Babylon. Like I've been promoting, and that's what I do with the anthologies. Like I do
Yeah.
stories related to my main story to like
Hmm.
just keep that marketing aspect to be like, oh, they'll keep
Yeah.
on seeing this name and they'll keep on connecting the dots and maybe even be more interested. But dude, it's taken, I mean, the punk
It's
anthology came
forever.
out last May, and I
Yep.
used that as a launching point to like announce Teenage Babylon and to ride off the success of the punk anthology to build an
Hmm.
audience. And it's like, okay, so now like it's a year later, and now I'm barely getting the ash can of Teenage Babylon when I thought
Yeah.
I'd have a first issue by now. When it's like, no, I'm probably not gonna have a first issue until like later this year, if not
Yeah.
early next year. It's a long pull, but I mean, it's just, I mean, unless you make comics, then you
Yeah.
really don't understand like what goes into it because
Even
your
even making ash
research.
cans take
Oh yeah.
forever too. And they're not as long as certain comics. Like I don't know how long Teenage Babylon is going to be,
Um,
but like
like this one, dude, nice little, cool
mhm.
little small floppy. It's
Yeah.
maybe like 12 pages, I want to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a lot already on there.
Yeah, like, and in general, like just black and white too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it really cool. But like, you could tell by just how much ink is on this page, how
Mhm.
much Christian poured into every single panel, and people forget that. Like, you know,
Yeah.
a lot goes into just. Oh, it's a cuss word, but I shouldn't show that. But
Uh,
Apollo ads.
that's fine.
But yeah, it's like one of those things. It's like this took almost like 6 months, 8 months to make, but it
Yeah.
all came like I was working on this 2 years ago practically.
Mhm.
um but
It,
I actually thought of the idea maybe 5 years ago and just
yeah.
had to ride through it and get to this point where I'm finally like making something out of it. Because collaborating even then, I mean, you're
Mhm.
working on different schedules, you're working on finding that collaborator and then adding more people to the group or having that one collaborator you work with do all the coloring, lettering, and all that stuff. That's
Yeah.
so much work because unless you're making it, you don't realize how hard it is to draw and write and letter and color.
Yeah, whenever I tell people about like future projects or ideas I have, I always try to make sure that when I tell people I'm like, this is something I'm working on. I can't guarantee it's going to come out or anytime soon or when, but I like telling people certain ideas that I have. And then like I say this with like a grain of salt
Hmm.
because sometimes when I tell people like an idea I have, they're like, oh, that's cool. It'd be like maybe you could do something like that. Every once in a while, it's a cool idea, but then every once in a while I get somebody who's like, yeah, you should do it like Invincible whenever like they just get all bloody and stuff like that. I'm like, all right, well, sure. If
Yeah.
you'll buy it in the future, I'll make it like Invincible, maybe.
You know, it's
But
funny you
yeah,
say that because I just finished reading all of Invincible and then I got to go back
it's
and
great,
read.
isn't it?
Oh, it's so fun. It is so much fun.
Yeah,
I recommend everyone read Invincible. It's like
yeah.
honestly a blast. I feel like the first like I did the compendiums. I feel like the first
Mhm,
half of the first one, especially because if you've watched the show, like it feels real
mhm.
slow. But once you get through the like a certain point, you're like, I can't put this down. And Kirkman's good at
Yeah.
that. You know what I mean? He's good at doing these long form stories. But like your book, you know, especially Sidekick for Hire,
Mhm.
what's so cool is that it's taking a superhero trope and spinning it on its head. And
Yeah.
that's, you know, that's so hard because as much as I love superheroes, I grew up with Marvel
Yeah.
and DC. Like I talk trash about
Same.
them all the time, but like I do love my Marvel and DC books and
Yeah.
heroes. But like getting a superhero and making an original idea out of it is insanely hard. And that's what makes Invincible so great. And I think that's what makes your book so great because you get
Yeah.
this and you really like put it in a new lens. Very Alan Moore of you to do that with like a sidekick too and everything. Like I love your approach with that. Like
Thank
was
you.
it
Yeah.
difficult for you to figure out a superhero trope that really hadn't been utilized before?
Yes, to a certain degree. Like I so I'm not gonna lie, I definitely did take inspiration from Invincible. It's such a
Mhm.
good series and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, I was like, I wanted to do a superhero book because I think you and I are in the same boat where we grew up on Marvel and DC and everything. It was awesome, but I wanted to prove that I can do a superhero book. But I want to do something different. And I always loved the Teen Titans story. Robin, obviously one of my favorites. Very huge
Mhm.
inspiration for this character. I was like, okay, well, I want to like I needed to figure out something like sidekick stories have been done before, but I don't know if they've done them like a realistic sense. So
Yeah,
that was the idea behind that.
it felt
Um,
fresh.
yeah, thank you. That's what I wanted to. Like if you read the first issue with like Captain Ultra on there, like obviously like the superhero names are very like campy and stuff like that.
Very
It's very
mystery
much
men. Like I don't know if you remember
yeah.
that movie. Yeah, I got
Oh
that
yeah.
total Captain Amazo and stuff like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like I got
exactly.
vibes like that. Yeah.
Well, like it feels very much like what a Superman comic would be in the very beginning of it before the
Hmm.
hero dies. And I was like, cool, that was my Superman. All right, who's the next hero that I make? I was like, you know what? I want to write Batman, but I'm legally not allowed to create Batman. So let me make this character named Nightwolf. And he's very Batman esque. I just kind of kept like, I was like, okay, what if this sidekick just worked with different heroes and like, how would that work? And how would he interact with it? So it was difficult. It's so funny thing about Invincible. There was an interview with Robert Kirkman where he talked about the big twist for Invincible. He was like, "Yeah, and on issue 10, we're gonna see what is it, Omni Man like betray the heroes and all that and kill everyone." And his editor or publisher at the time was like, "That's cool. Don't wait till issue 10. That's way too
Yeah.
long, and you're not gonna last that long." I was like, "Oh my god, yeah!" I like
Great
when I
advice.
heard that, yeah, and self-publishing, it's obviously a lot of my own money, it's a lot of my own funding and self-funding. I was like, okay, well, I need to bring those twists faster. I need to bring those hooks faster for my story. And that's what I did with Psychic Fire. I was like, instead of waiting till issue 5 or issue 3, issue 2, whatever, I did two of them in issue 1. I was like, this is the thing that needs
It
to hook
works.
people in. Yeah.
Hmm.
But that took a lot of writing and rewriting throughout the whole thing. So it was difficult, but I like after a while I finally got the hang of it and I was like, this feels something different. This feels like something I want to read, which I've heard that before 100 times. Make something that you would want to read.
Hmm. Yeah.
So that was why it was a little difficult for that.
Cool stuff to unpack there, like really quick too, is that
Mhm.
you know when you're working on like making something different and unique and you're working on like a new series capturing them in right away is what you want to do. Donny Cates, I don't know if you read his Venom run, but
Oh yeah.
like
Oh, I loved
yeah,
his Venom run.
so cool.
His
um
God Country is my favorite.
oh
It's like always my top 3
dude,
comics
yeah,
of all time.
I'm a big Donnie like fanboy and whatnot too.
Yeah.
So everything he's done, I've always been like, you name dropped him earlier, and I was like, I love Donnie. Like
Yeah.
he's a nice dude too.
Yeah.
And like he was his arcs in the Venom run. If you go back and look, he was gonna do the second arc first, and then go and do the first arc that's in that series, and his editor was
Yeah.
like, no, you got to flip these around, man. So like the first arc we see was intentionally the second arc, but that's the one that drew us all in, and that's what got us all hooked. And just
Yeah.
doing those switches, vital. Like do anything you can to make the story, and honestly it probably helped the story a whole lot overall. Do you think that, making that switch up actually elevated everything throughout the story overall?
I do. It was something that I'm really happy I did. It's funny because like the editor that you said, like I had a few people read my comics. I
Mhm.
had one editor who's done editing for like books, but I was like, okay, I need you to edit my comic. And they were like, well, why don't you get a comic book editor? It's like, because I want a comic that makes sense to people who don't read comics. I want to make
Mm,
sure it's easy for them to read. Like if they pick up the issue, will they understand it? And they were like, okay, that makes sense. They told me the same thing. They were like, you kind of, it's missing something. It feels like you're almost there, but you need something else. And that's something I appreciate too, where if I ever whenever I have editors or somebody who's looking over my stuff, they tell me, it's like, hey, this isn't working. This doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel right. This
mhm.
kind of feels off and you're missing something else. So like, cool. They give me what they think is wrong, which is what I look for. And they're like, I can give you a solution, but if I give you the solution, it's going to be my solution rather than yours. I was like, oh my
Makes
God,
sense.
I like that. Okay. So they just tell me everything that's wrong. It hurts my ego for a moment,
Yeah,
but
but it
then,
makes you solve the
yeah,
puzzle.
exactly.
Like,
Then I have to think, and then it still becomes my story with their help. And I love that instead of it just being like mine and their story.
mhm.
I was like,
Yeah.
that's something I appreciate.
That's something editors need to like watch out and learn from. And I've always kind of Alex and I, Alex, the editor for here for the show, and we do everything with Apollo together.
Yeah.
We edit each other's work all the time. We're
Hmm.
each other's personal editors. And what we try to do the most is exactly that. Like point out things that could be corrected, but
Yeah.
not give how we would correct it. Like
Hmm.
maybe, give a hint or an idea or like, clarity as an example, but like I'm never telling Alex, dude, you need to do this with the story, or this needs to happen here. Or,
Yeah.
it's like, no, like this is missing something. You need to
Yeah.
have a switch up here. You
Yeah.
give them like hints and let them fill in the blanks. You don't want to just give
Yeah.
them all the answers to the quiz because they're not growing at that point either.
Yeah. I agree with the like, maybe swap this around. You don't have to do it, but
Yeah.
it's one of those. Um, I'll use my new book as a perfect example. I had somebody else read it before we pushed it to the printers and everything.
Hmm.
And there was a few things like in the sewer scene, whenever you see like the gators area,
Hmm.
I was like, oh, look at all these symbols. He's like, what symbols? You're kind of missing that. You need something else to like make me see this. I was like, oh my God, that's a good point. And then me and Colton were like, oh yeah, Colton's like, that's easy. Like, and he added like subtle things where if you look at the full page of that, like the throne area, you
Yeah.
see markings on the wall and everything
Yeah.
everywhere. I was like, oh, that's so cool. And I love that. Like that was something else. He's like, he didn't give me the exact details of what it was, but he's like, this is something that you're missing. And
Nice.
I greatly appreciate it. Now, on the other side of the coin, I respect this man's opinion so much. He's been so helpful and integral in my career path. And one of the other things he said, he's like, I don't like the files of the characters on there. He's like, I think that's too cartoony. I don't think that really, if it's, and I was like, okay. And I was like, I 100% understand. I get
Yeah.
that. And I said, I'm going to keep it in there because I really liked it. Colton
Yeah.
really likes it. It was fun for us. He's like, totally fine. I was just giving my opinion. I'm like, and that's what I wanted.
Hmm.
And I told him like, I'm going to keep that in, but I never want to be defensive. Like, well, you just don't understand it. I was like, no, I understand.
Yeah.
Just, just not, I'm just not going
Maybe
to
it's
change
even
that
like a
part.
sign for you to like clean it up or alter it in like a sense and
Yeah.
whatnot too. You know what I mean? Like, how do I make this more favorable, or how do I enhance it a bit more
Yes.
rather than cutting out? Yeah, because I've been there too, but like you're like, I really like this idea though. Like, I'm gonna
Yeah.
be really stubborn with this and be like, I'm not letting this go.
Yeah.
But it pays off. I enjoyed it like crazy.
Mhm.
So whatever
Yeah.
you did or whatever the original was to the overall outcome, win, because I love
Yeah.
seeing those like little files pop up and being like, even the like just the folder and the design and just like the
Yeah.
specs, like really well thought out. And I think it just
Mhm.
adds and elevates the story and gives us as a reader some more background to what we're seeing in the moment. Um, and it's like
Yeah.
it fits with the overall story of like, oh, this was this is the file on the creature. This is what we as an
Yeah.
audience get to examine.
Yeah.
I think a fun thing would be cool to like eventually see is like actual files on all these monsters or like trading card things with specs. And
Mhm.
now I'm giving you ideas for like whatever
No, that's
editorial aspects, but
it.
like that's fun stuff that'd be really cool to like come out with.
Well, that's the other thing. Like with Colton and I just texting back and forth pretty much. Feels like every day half the time. But he will like text me. He's like, "Hey, what do you think about this? What do you think like an action figure?" I'm like, "Okay, let's slow down. Let's just get the comic out first." And I'll be like, "Hey, what if we did this for promotion?" Like we do it back and forth all the time. And sometimes he'll send me stuff. He's like, "Hey, what do you think of this as a variant cover? What do you think of this?" And he sends me like, I think I have like in our text like 8 different cover ideas that he's had. He's like, "Yeah, I just got bored at work and I just made this. What do you think?" I was like, "Jesus, dude, I love it, but I don't know how we can fit that in there right now." But it's very much like there's ideas back and forth where it's
Mhm.
like, is if we both really agree on something, that's going into the book.
Yeah.
If it's something like, one of us is feeling a little off about, we'll kind of work it a little bit more before we try to put it in the book. And if one of us is like, "Yeah, I don't think that's really for our thing," it's like, cool, we know now. And it
Yeah.
might come back up later. But yeah,
I love it,
it's
man. That's
it's
so
nice seeing
cool.
other people's opinions. That's
Your
the other thing.
collaborations with people are so important because that's what comes out of it. Is just the
Yeah.
best of both of you working together or all of you working together as a team, like
Yeah.
you, having an art and even with the punk anthology, you had 4 people on that story. And it's
Mhm.
funny that some of
Yeah.
my one-page stories in there had a full team on them compared to
Yeah.
like most of my 6 pagers had like one person. You know what I mean? It's one of those weird flip arounds, but
Well,
like
that
it
one page was
elevates
like
that.
everyone I wanted to work with too.
Yeah.
Like Laura, I've seen their art so many times. I was
Laura
like,
is so
I want to do a
cool.
one page.
I
Oh
need to
my
get
God,
her
it's
on the
awesome.
show. She's
Oh my
just
God.
insane. Yeah.
Yeah. They are just so cool and they're great. Um, and then I believe, yeah, Eros, the colorist, I've
Mhm.
seen some of his stuff before. I was like, "Hey, I want you to, I feel like your colors would work well with Laura's art." And he said, "Cool, absolutely." And then
Mhm.
Tobin I worked with 100 times before, and
Oh,
Tobin's
cool.
fantastic. And I was like, here's an idea. Because lettering is one of those things that I'm trying to learn how to do, but I
Mhm.
was not at that point where I could comfortably do a good job.
Makes
And so I
sense.
let
Yeah.
him kind of mess around with it. He's like, "Cool." And I made the little logo for it in front of it.
Oh, good. Good
And it
steak.
was just, I loved it. It was just amazing.
Man, I love the passion you pour into everything you do, from like
Thank you.
working on like design and picking up new skill sets to just evolving with the craft of writing to how
Mhm.
you think about like collaborating with people and just your approach to your scripts. Like it's all very enriching. It's very fresh. And I feel like as an indie creator, like you are like the pinnacle of what a lot of people aspire to be when
Thank
it
you.
comes to
That
just
means a
really good
lot.
storytelling. Of course, yeah, dude. I think I encourage everyone to check out your books, and I really encourage
Thank
everyone
you.
to go and dive into what you've been doing because I'm excited to read more of everything you have. Like I will
Yeah.
hands down say, like all this stuff is very fresh and fun, and I feel like it should be with like larger publishers at this point because it's just
Yeah.
it's kind of what is needed, especially when you're on like a DC Marvel burnout and you
Yeah.
want to get something like, okay, well, I just need something to like turn off my brain, but still be excited about. And this is
Yeah.
all your work is really just producing that. So I'm really excited for your overall future in comics in
Yeah.
general.
I would love to work with bigger publishers too. I think I told people in the beginning, like I pitched Sidekick for Hire around and no one responded for a while. And I was like, whatever, I'm just going to keep
Yeah.
doing my own thing then,
And that's the best thing
as
you could
I'm
do
not
is
going to
just
wait around.
pump it out yourself because there's
Yeah.
stories that definitely deserve to be told and out there in the universe, and I hope people come across them and get inspired because I ask you so much about the superhero stuff because I've never really
Yeah.
had a superhero idea that was
Mhm.
like concrete or I felt confident to pursue. I still don't really.
Yeah.
And I love being able to like go back and be like, okay, so this is a superhero comic, let's
Yeah.
check it out, and then just being wowed by it you know?
Yeah.
That's the best thing you can do when you approach a book like that. And with this burnout we all get from how popular things are,
Yeah.
seeing stuff like this and then going and watching The Boys in a couple weeks with the new season, I'm gonna be so hyped.
Yeah.
It just mixes
Yeah.
really well together, So I'm hyped for that.
It's
I'm
just,
hyped to see what comes out of it all for you.
yeah, it's nice doing different things. I think that's like obviously Sidekick for Hire, Prolong, very different. Uh Punk's Not Dead, very different. And
Yeah.
now We Call the Myth feels different as well. It still
Yeah.
like has the comedy part into it as well. But like it's a weird monster. Like I'm not doing probably the best thing where like, how Stephen King, he's a horror book writer.
Hmm.
I'm doing a bunch of different stories to see what I like doing, what I like working on. Like I would love to do a sci-fi book one day. I would love to do more of a horror style book. I want to do more sad comics. I want to do more funny comics. I want to see what else I can do, what else I can mess around with, what's something new I can try and hope maybe fail, but maybe succeed on, and then
Hmm.
try something else different.
And that's
That's
the
what
only
I'm
way you're going to
excited
find
about.
out is by
Mhm.
trying it out and giving yourself the chance to attempt all those other different genres and story types. And the only way you'll know if you're good or bad at them is just by doing them. Um,
Exactly.
and I hope everyone takes that to heart as well. Is that take your risks, take the chances, and experiment and challenge yourself because that's the best way you'll get the cool
Yep.
outcomes that these creators get. But I didn't even realize we went over our typical hour mark, hanging out and everything. Such a fun
Sorry.
conversation, dude. No, no, no. This has been so exciting. I love talking about craft stuff. I love hearing
Yeah.
about where it all comes from with you too. There's a list of questions I had in my head that we didn't even get to approach. So I hope we get you back on the show sometime soon
Yeah, of
and we can
course.
explore
Anytime. I
some of
like
this
just
more.
talking with you as well.
Yeah, dude, super cool. I'm so glad that we actually got to sit down and talk since we put a
Yeah.
book out together and you're my first book.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you got to be in the show
Oh my
and got to meet up this week. So why don't you tell us, all the audience where to find your work and what you'll be up to for the rest of 2024?
God. Okay. Yeah. I'm on Instagram and Twitter at yes that Christian, and it's Christian spelled with a K, not CH. Keep it simple for all my social medias. I am doing a few conventions right now since the wedding that I just had last month was the biggest part of my life for a little while. That took a lot of time, but I will be at Savannah next weekend for a convention. I'll be at MomoCon as a guest, which is super great show. I love that one. I'll be at Heroes Con, which is just a fun time if you're ever a comic book creator. You just want to talk to other creators and check out weird or fun books. That's an awesome show. Dragon Con as well, a few other shows, Chattanooga Comic Con. But yeah, right now I'm releasing We Call the Myths. I'm shipping them out to Kickstarter backers, and I'm setting up an online store so people who aren't able to get it can buy it through there. And then I'll see. I got some other things in the works, few pitches that I'm sending out, but yeah, that's all I can really talk about right now. We're making another issue We Call the Myths already. Like Colton's probably halfway through inking the pages.
Oh, sick.
He's way ahead. I'm like, "Oh, okay, man," and then so I have to get him ready for because it's a 4 issue story for that one
Oh, cool.
that we
Oh,
already
cool.
planned out. Yeah.
I love that. I love
So,
when an artist starts catching up to you. China Rosemaria does that to me, and I'm just like, oh, I
yeah.
gotta get writing. I gotta get going. I gotta start thinking of the
Mhm.
ideas. Like she's catching up, and I'm just like, all right, now take a
Yeah.
breather. And
Luckily,
then,
we have an outline for everything. It's
yeah,
just it's getting like enough script for him, and also he's so funny because he's like, "Yeah, I'll skim through it the first time and then start drawing, and then I'll read it." I'm like, "That's fine, man. Whatever is
whatever
easiest for
works.
you.
It makes me scared, but whatever. It's full
It's
enough,
fine.
and it's
It's
great.
cool." It
Uh,
cracks me
I,
up.
I love it. Christian, thank you so much for hanging today. It's been a
Yeah.
pleasure. And for all of our audience, thanks for hanging. I'm so excited. There's so many new CWS updates coming out. At the time of this episode airing, I think I might be in hanging out in Detroit with CWS, where we have a bunch of new updates going on.
Nice.
We know that some things have been a little slow on our end, but we're going to be showing you all the new stuff that's been being installed, what we're working on, a bunch of cool announcements, a bunch of appearances and things that we're partnering with as well. So, as crazy it has been at CWS, we know that, customers are our first choice and our creators are our first choice. And that's why we're always, everything we're working on is to benefit everybody, and everyone's gonna be really happy with the outcome. And the quality of the books that'll be pumping out with our new system. So super excited for all that. And we'll have a new website going up soon with all sorts of new capabilities and all sorts of fun stuff. We're really working on a lot of fun rebranding and, re-envisioning what CWS is. So it's been really exciting being part of the team and doing all this. And don't forget to check out all of our social media for updates and ways to contact us if you need to for any ways. Contact ways have changed in the last couple months. So keep an eye out for that. But other than that, thanks for hanging, stay creative, and stay inspired. Looking for high quality printing, fast turnaround, and the industry's best customer service? Look no further than Comix Wellspring. Trusted by thousands of indie comic creators, Comix Wellspring is proven to be the go-to comic book printer. So when you're ready to bring your comic books to life, go to comicswellspring.com and be sure to check out one of the best platforms to sell your physical and digital comics online, the CWS Bookstore. Remember to subscribe, hit that notification bell to see our lives come out twice every single week on YouTube and podcast platforms. And also tag us when you share your favorite episodes and moments from the show. And remember, creators, thanks for hanging, keep creating, and stay inspired.